excited to be here. She just accosted a woman in a Mario costume outside.
Lady Mario.
Was that for an Instagram story? Was that?
A little Insta story, yeah, I was excited.
Yeah, and are we gonna get Andy online, or?
Who I've never met, and still haven't.
Yeah, we may be having a few.
Does this count?
Hey!
Yeah, I've never met you.
I know.
We've never spoken directly until this moment.
Exactly, but I feel like I've been in your mind.
Yes. Sorry about that.
So wait, Andy, you're in Sunnyvale or the Moon? Where are you?
This is actually Sunnyvale, not the Moon. I can prove it. Yep, Sunnyvale, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. I wish I could have been there, but scheduling is a nightmare.
Great. I don't know if they can put it up, but we were hoping to get this background changed to the map of Artemis. So hopefully you guys can see that for the first time. And that'll be really cool.
That was her choice, actually.
My
She's
choice,
looking
just
out.
for like a second.
Nerd alert, she's really looking out. Just saying. I hadn't even seen it before this, so.
I know, like until a minute ago you hadn't seen it. Now, Rosario, I want you to tell us how you got involved with this. You know, what happened?
The ominous A, actually called and reached out about it. And I'd never done an Audible book before, and I haven't, to be honest, I haven't listened to a whole bunch. I've always heard about it, and now that I've gone through the process, I really appreciate it, so I'm gonna do a lot more of that. But I had done, the voice of Lego Batgirl, and I voiced Wonder Woman, and my very first one that I had done was Artemis. So I was kind of feeling like this could be a really, really awesome opportunity, and I was a big fan of The Martian, so.
Yeah. And you cold read it.
I did.
As you were doing the audiobook.
Talk about scheduling. I kept thinking that it wasn't going to happen. They say I was their first choice, but whatever. They still had other ladies that they were reaching out to. And with scheduling and everything, I wasn't sure if it was going to happen. And I was traveling. I was in Africa. I was in all these places, and I couldn't download it. And so I just didn't read it. And then all of a sudden, it was like, no, it's happening, and we're going to record it this week. And I was like, okay, great. And then I was cold reading it and realized, oh my God, there's like all these accents and like really technical jargon that you're really fond of, my man.
Yeah, no, I remember that. They were like, oh, she's gonna read it on this date. I'm like, ooh, cool, I'm looking forward to it. And they're like, oh, she couldn't make it because she's sick or something. They never really gave me the answer. And then they're like, we're gonna try to schedule it. And then they're like, okay, she read it. I'm like,
yeah, Andy, I'm guessing you didn't necessarily write this in order, for it to be read out loud. Is it?
I don't know, why not?
Yeah. Well, behind us we have this map that's in the book that you guys will see if you get the book. And Andy, can you just give us a layout of Artemis and tell us what each of these little bubbles are?
Sure. So each bubble is this big air pressure vessel. It's a sphere that's half underground and half above ground. About the big ones are 200 meters across, and the small one, Armstrong, is 100 meters. The double hulled system. So there's like 6 centimeters of aluminum, a meter of crushed lunar rock, and then another 6 centimeters of aluminum, and then air pressure inside. That's where all the people live. So it's virtually impossible to puncture or damage or beat.
And then
and all the bubbles are named after Apollo astronaut, and they're named after the astronaut in the order that they walked on the moon, in the order that they built the bubbles. So Armstrong was the first one built, Aldrin was the second. So
that's awesome.
Rosario, do you remember sort of like Aldrin and Conrad and what those names meant?
I do, but when I'm looking at the map right now, I'm just feeling like, have you been to Burning Man?
Yeah, there's a certain motif at Burning Man too.
So basically, Aldrin, I think, is the tourism district. Conrad is where jazz lives, which is working class. I forget what Bean. Armstrong is industry.
Yeah, Armstrong is industry. Aldrin is the tourist center, casinos and hotels and stuff. Conrad is kind of the blue collar folks live, the low income people. Bean is sort of like suburban life. It's like middle income folks. And then Shepherd is where the really rich people live.
It's like, yeah, like, I don't know, Martha's Vineyard or something.
Yeah, Aspen, Colorado of the moon.
Now, and can you guys explain basically what Artemis is in the context of the book? Like, it's a city on the moon, and this is a crime caper. So just sort of walk us through that.
I think you should answer this, Andy. I'll have more than happy to follow up, but it feels a bit weird doing that with you actually here, being like, well, I wrote it, and then no, I'm self-conscious.
Well, yeah, I mean, Artemis is, well, I've always loved crime capers. I've always loved caper stories, heist stories, you know, The Sting, Ocean's 11, that kind of stuff. And of course, I'm a sci-fi author, so I figured, well, ¿por qué no los dos? And so I'm like, I want a crime caper that takes place on the moon. So,
what year are you envisioning this happening?
Artemis takes place right around the late 2080s, so probably around like 2088-ish.
So is it like people have fled Earth after Blade Runner 2049 and are like...
I'd have to clear that with Ridley, I think. No, Earth is fine. Artemis exists because there's an economic reason for it to. I built all this. I'll spare the audience all the details of this, but I went through this deep economic analysis of where I think the commercial space industry will go, and how efficient it'll get. And I said, like, well, let's say the commercial space industry gets as efficient in terms of fuel to overhead ratio as the commercial airline industry. And from that, I came up with like, well, this is how much it would cost to go put things in low Earth orbit for passengers to put freight. And that made a lunar city an economic viability. Like lunar tourism would be something that middle-class people could afford if, you know, as a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. It'd work out to be, you could go to the moon for 2 weeks for about $70,000 in 2015 dollars. And so I'm like, well, that is the sort of thing that companies would invest in. They'd say like, yeah, and that's why Artemis exists, tourist destination. It's about 40 kilometers from the Apollo 11 landing site, so you can get on a train and go to the Apollo 11 Visitors Center, and you're in a nice pressure vessel right up against it, look out the windows at the Eagle, and so on.
Rosario, what were your first thoughts when you read it, and what drew you to signing up for it and to Jazz as a character?
Well, we kind of touched on that. I cold read it in the room. So it was really interesting because we'd be doing like 70 pages a day and I'd be getting super into it and my brain would start, I'm not dyslexic, but my brain would start feeling like I was dyslexic because it was just so much reading. And I'd have to like get up and kind of walk around a little bit or go to the bathroom or something like that. But I was so enmeshed in the story. It was so incredible. Just the kind of, I was just really drawn to Jazz herself, and I think that was when I understood the sort of overlying story when I first signed on to it, you know, and that's what I had really loved about The Martian, was that this was someone that you could believe is a real person, and this is not about, it's sci-fi, but the kind of sci-fi that's really tangible. And even though it's incredibly technical, I think, Andy, you write really beautifully in layman's terms, in the sense where it really translates, and you feel like you're really there. And so this woman was, was sort of that counterpart to Matt Damon's sort of character when, you know, in the film version, being able to watch him, I kept envisioning her in the same way that I saw him just sort of not give up, not like the physicality of it was, as an actor, was really important to me to think about that for her, and that posture of someone who just doesn't allow themselves that moment of too much doubt. And it doesn't mean that she wasn't emotional, because she was very emotional. But she just had this capacity when you're raised in a situation like this and that is your normal. She moved there when she was 6 years old to the moon.
Yeah, let's describe Jazz for these people.
Yeah, so Jazz Bashara, she's being raised.
She's the protagonist.
She's Jasmine. She's Jazz for short. And she is the daughter of a welder who lives on the moon. They immigrated to the moon when she was 6 years old. And she's just an incredibly bright, really, really smart young lady who, they're Saudi Arabian, and she doesn't feel like Earth is really her home. She doesn't necessarily feel, there's a whole thing of people when they go back, they usually go back to their country of origin, and that's not a place, that's not where she considers home. The moon is her home, and she thinks like a mooner. And it's really beautiful to kind of see when you as a New Yorker, street smarts is incredibly necessary. You have to have a certain kind of situational awareness to really kind of navigate this city. And she has that about her there. And she has a ridiculous amount of skills, but it's really about being there. It's very specific to the conditions and the realities. And, when a surprise happens, that our natural instincts just don't work.
We lost Andy
here.
Oh, did you?
Well, we can't see you,
No,
so it
there you
feels
are.
like,
There
there
you
you are.
Hi, Andy.
I didn't lose you. I'm just listening to
And so I was just really drawn to that. Like, as I kept going, I was just really moved by this woman who, her tenacity and just how much she threw herself into situations and just how quick she was. She's just incredibly sharp, and it was really empowering to pretend to be this person who could just manage so many different situations. Like, it just felt like super MacGyver. Like, she's just like MacGrubering it out. Like, it was so exciting. And I'd love to totally think that I'd be that amazing under pressure, but I don't know that I'd be able to do it under pressure on the moon per se. But it was really cool.
Well, if
to
that's
kind
where
of
you were
navigate
from.
there. Yeah, if you were raised
You
there.
grew up there.
For sure, and those would be your instincts. And that's, I think, what was really cool was to play someone who made that normal. So when you're in that experience, it really feels normal. It feels very plausible. This experience, this idea of a city on the moon and moon tourism and all of that stuff, as you're reading this, it feels like, why isn't that yesterday? It makes a lot of sense.
And so in Andy, she's in her mid-20s, I guess, and she's a porter.
Yes.
She's a porter. I mean, so there's interesting parts about like how class exists on the moon. You would think that it would maybe be like a utopia if there was a city that you were building from scratch on another planet, like on another celestial body. But yeah, how did you come up with jazz? Like, where do you
Jazz
go?
herself? Well, okay, so two different things. The kind of class structure, such as it is on the moon, is just based on resort town. I did a lot of research on, like, there are towns all over the Caribbean that basically only exist as tourist destination. Like, there's no other reason why you would build a city there. And so those towns all follow the same pattern. Right along the waterfront, there's all these hotels, casinos, opulent life for the guests, for the customers who come and bring money into the system. And then behind that, there's usually, not so great living arrangement for the people who live and work there. And so Artemis is just, I didn't make this up. This is just kind of the economy that always seems to develop around for a specific town. As for jazz, well, Artemis went through a lot of revision. At first, I had this one story that was nothing like what Artemis ended up being. And my original idea was like completely different story, completely different main set of characters, completely different everything. And Jazz was a very tertiary character. I just needed like a smuggler, kind of shady rogue for like 2 or 3 scenes, and then that was it. And so I invented Jazz just kind of like, okay, well, I need a smuggler. What's a country I haven't used yet because people go to Artemis from all over the world? I'm like, Saudi Arabia. Have that. Okay, Saudi Arabia. And let's make her a woman just because, I don't know, my brain decided she'd be a woman. And that was it.
Good to know.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Random fate decided you'd be a woman, Rosario, so, and then that story wasn't very good. The plot didn't flow very well. I had to make some big kind of illogical leap to make things happen, and it wasn't coming together well. So I scrapped it. But okay, I'm going to come up with a new concept. Same setting. Setting's really solid. I like that. But new concept. And with new concept, new set characters, although some used from the previous version, and Jazz was in it. And she was more prominent this time, but still not even the main character. But this time is prominent. I had to find her backstory. Okay, well, from Saudi Arabia. let's say she's in here from.
You understand?
Yeah, I think that the
'Cause I'm not
audio
understanding.
might be.
Sorry.
My audio go.
You're cutting in and out.
Yeah, you're cutting it.
Am
Is
I
it
cutting
cut
it out?
in the reception? Can't. It automatically just makes me think of all those movies where like, I can't, what, you're cutting out. Just do whatever they want.
Well, I'll ask you something while we're waiting for Andy to get fixed. Was it you?
But I want to clarify something.
Yeah.
Like, just as crazy as it might sound that I showed up to do several pages of, well, not several pages, a couple hundred pages, cold. All of the Lego Batman stuff I did cold. All of the.
Look at you.
But it's also just really normal because they don't like to read anything in advance, and it keeps changing and like shocking, you know, that they keep everything like so hidden. But like it's one of those things where it was so interesting to kind of jump on this and think that I was kind of having that similar experience, and then very much not, because I didn't get to speak to Andy. You know, and at least, you know, when you're on, you know, I'm talking to Chris McKay, or like, you know, you have a little bit more. I had everyone who was working at Audible, but I didn't get to necessarily pick his brain. And so it was really interesting sort of reading it. And because I don't really listen to a lot of Audible stuff, I had no idea. I actually had it in my head that I was just gonna do the narration. Like, that's what I thought I was being hired to do. I was just gonna narrate it, and then they were gonna have all these other people read all of these other things, and I was gonna do jazz. And then it was like, no, you're gonna be like talking like this when you're doing the Marine, and I'm doing all these accents, and it was just this most remarkable experience, and I'm so glad I jumped in, and I wonder, actually, had I known how much it was gonna be, if I would have said yes, but I'm really glad that I did. No, not in that sense, not in a bad way, but just like, oh my God, it was really, really, really intense. Like, yo, listen to Audible books, like listen to audiobooks. It's crazy. You're doing like 70 plus pages a day. It's nuts. It's like, I mean, I babysat since I was really young, so I'm like used to reading and like doing voices and stuff like that. It was one of the reasons why I was always rehired. But it was really intense and really amazing, and it was a really fun way to experience it, because I'd be reading and kind of going along, and then I'd see where it was going and go, stop. And I'd start to read ahead a little bit, or I would go back and, can I do this with more breathing? Like, as we were just listening right now, because that was the very first stuff that we did, the opening stuff that we just listened to is the very first chapter, very first thing of the first chapter. And later on, when I got, you know, kind of understood more what was happening, and what I wanted to do with all the voices to distinguish them and make it more fun, was to make sure that, you know, when they're running, that you sound like you're panting and you're doing all that kind of stuff. So I was literally just back there going, can I just redo this one scene just so it's like, hook me up? No, I can't. You know, like I just wanted to add a little something so it has a little bit more action in the beginning.
I love you're just sort of making up the way that an audiobook would go on your own, so it's probably going to be a really unique experience, I think.
I hope so. I mean, now I'm going to judge everybody else's.
She's a performer.
Yeah.
She's trying to perform, and it's her job.
Yeah. In the booth by myself, just making
since we're talking about this, Andy, you did not make it easy on her. There are a lot of people in this book because it's a whole city. It's not the Martian. It's a totally opposite. And we have a clip of character accents, and then so why don't we play that, and then you can tell us what it is.
Yeah.
All right. I put out my hands. I can answer all of that. But first, I need to know, are we all on board? The room fell silent. I'm not convinced you're right, Bob said. But I can't risk Artemis having the future you described. I'm in. Dad nodded. In. You know I'm in, said Svoboda. I love a good keeper. Me too, said Lenny. I mean, the being in part. I'm undecided on capers. Earth's air is 20%
Oh
oxygen.
wait, we don't let that one yet.
It's like African accents though, Hungarian, Norwegian. Like there's a lot of it's really cool actually thinking about, I really love that. It being a tourist city, you know, it's what you would get in a major tourist city where you would just get people from all over the world.
Yeah, Andy, were you reading this out loud to yourself as you were writing it? Was it really important for you to do all sorts of different voices?
I mean, yeah, especially for the people who are like kind of first generation immigrants, kind of people who grew up in a country and then came to Artemis. Jazz, of course, just has whatever Artemis's normal accent is. Fortunately, as a writer, I just write the words. I don't have to worry about how the inflection is. But some of them I imagined as having just like Bob is like an American former Marine, so he doesn't have any, accent other than the American accent. But then there's like Zasoka Strobel, who is like, I think from Hungary. And she has like a very thick accent. She can barely speak English. So I'm looking forward to seeing how Rosario did that, because I haven't heard it. I've heard some clips.
Okay, I'll be honest, because we had, when I found that out, I was very adamant to have someone come in who did accents, so I could really try to distinguish all of these voices as much as possible. But one of the things that kept happening was them saying like to pull it back, because a lot of times, I guess in audiobooks, they try to more suggest the accent than like go for it. So I tried, I pushed it in there as much as I possibly could. But sometimes I got told to do it a little bit lighter, so I don't know what ended up making it. But I tried with her specifically. I know you're talking about that hers was really thick.
Well, you told me that you showed up and you started reading, and then you're like, oh shit, dialogue? Like, I have to do all these accents? What's going on?
Yeah.
So, and then you brought in a dialect coach.
Yeah.
Right?
Who was really, really amazing and really, really fun. And yeah, just because it's just so, when you're reading all the way through, you just want to make sure that you really get the distinctions between all the different characters and who's speaking what time. And like that particular scene, that's a scene where they're all in the same scene together, and there's only but so many times you can keep going, he said, she said, he said, she said. Like you're really just them talking to each other. And it was really fun. I felt like I was doing this a lot.
To yourself, talking to yourself. Wait, and what was the experience of working with the dialect coach? Like, you were doing it on the day also.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. When she's never done anything like that before. She said she's never done so many accents all at one time. So it was really fun for her actually to kind of keep jumping, and it was beautiful. It was a really fun experience to just kind of read English in many different interpretations, basically.
Andy, I wanted to ask you about just sort of you did The Martian. It was a huge success. You'd been a software programmer before that, and then now they're like, you have to write another book. So was it paralyzing? You had a good story. You told me about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a saying: give a man a book and you entertain him for a night. Teach a man to write and you give him crippling self-doubt for life. So The Martian I wrote leisurely over 3 years while I was working a day job, and I kind of posted chapters whenever I wanted, and then kind of know the story from there. And then Random House is like, okay, what's your next book? I'm like, all right, well, I had this story that I was working on called Zhek, Z-H-E-K, and I was a little bit into it, and I'm like, let's do that. So Random House like, yeah, sure, contract here, we'll make it happen. Here's your thing. So I had about a year. I worked on Jack for almost a year. I was 70,000 words in. For reference, The Martian is 105,000 words. So about like words of a book in. And I'm like, this book sucks. It's not working. The characters aren't interesting. The plot isn't that compelling. There's a lot of unbelievable aspects. I'm 70,000 words in and I'm still in the first act. It's going to be like some giant tome that nobody's going to want to read. This is not working. And so I talked to the publisher, my agent, everybody about that. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, like, well, I've got this other idea about a story about a city on the moon. And so, told you guys, if I write that, dead. And they said, like, well, okay, if that's what you're feeling, if you feel like Jack isn't working, you want to write something new, sure. And they added a year onto my deadline so that I could write Artemis. And I'm really, really grateful because Artemis is definitely better than Jack could have been. Especially because
lucky you guys.
Yeah, well, lucky me. Especially because I carved out a niche as being a realistic science sci-fi author, and Artemis is realistic science, and Jacques was not. It had faster than light travel, alien telepath, and all that stuff. And I feel so much more comfortable staying in the wheelhouse.
And didn't you get some advice from a friend in Santa Fe?
Yes. Yeah, so whenever I go to New Mexico, I hang out with George R. Martin. He lives in Santa Fe. I was in Albuquerque working on this on a TV show. Yeah, George R. And he's a cool guy. We hang out kind of in the same city. And I was telling him, like, man, this is rough because right out of the gate, I was a huge success. Pretty much every book that I write now on is going to be less popular, probably. And I'm worried that, like, it's time for me to write my next book. I'm worried that people are going to say, like, oh, okay, he had one good book in. Okay, well, he's a one-hit. I'll forget him. You know, I've got that imposter syndrome thing going on. And he said, yeah, that feeling never ends.
Will you say that again? Because the audio is cutting in and out.
Okay. George said, that feeling never ends. Yeah, you could be working on your 28th book, and you'll still feel that. I'm like, thanks, George.
Now, and also, you had a good story about finding out that this was going to be a movie.
Oh, yeah. Well, hopefully my audio isn't cutting in and out too much. I'll try to speak slowly so that the cuts won't ruin it. I was in the UK. I was in London having dinner and drinks with my publisher and a bunch of people who work with her. And my agent called and said, oh, Fox wants the rights to Artemis now. I'm like, well, I mean, okay, what's going on? They're like, they made this offer, and it was just a slam dunk offer for a straight up purchase, not the option, a purchase, which is a big distinction. And the Fox really wanted it, and they said, here's a big pile of money, give us the film right, shut up. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and then you just found out that Lord and Miller are going to direct it. Woo.
Yeah, found that out. That's exciting, very exciting. And I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. So I think the next step is they're gonna pick a screenwriter that I don't know who they'll pick, but they're going to select a screenwriter that they have worked with before, presumably, and work from there.
And is that anything you've ever wanted to do?
Screenplay writing? Yeah, for original works, but I don't think I'd want to adapt my own novel to a screenplay. It's so hard. It's like, I mean, anyone who's written screenplays can tell you it's all about cramming everything into 120 minutes. And so you're like, oh, which one of my children do I love the least? Is picking the plot that have to go. That's rough. But Drew Goddard did a fantastic job when he adapted The Martian. I think it's best for adaptations to be done by a different author.
Drew Goddard, also from New Mexico.
Yes, and related to the Goddard that the Goddard Spice Flight Center is named after.
Wait, and so in Rosario, do you get first dibs on movie roles in this thing?
I don't recall that.
Start a Twitter campaign.
I actually said, I mean, there's a lot of really great roles actually all throughout this, which is really, really fun. But actually, when we even talked about it, I thought, what I love about this is just how diverse the cast actually has the potential of being, and it would be really amazing to have and find a young Saudi Arabian actress to play this role. I think would be pretty remarkable, and really try to cast people, appropriately, which doesn't happen very often, and I feel really blessed and honored that I got to played a Saudi Arabian woman and a Kenyan man and Kenyan woman and Hungarian man and Hungarian woman and Norwegian woman, and I got to do all of that, so it was really, really awesome. But I'm definitely enthralled with the story. Andy, I think you did good. I don't know necessarily in scrapping the other one, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, you were raising your eyebrows.
I am a Trekkie, and I was like, light speed? We're talking, where are we going with this? This sounds awesome. But at the same time, I think that there's a really awesome potential for this to really, it's very visual. And he
I would
writes
be-
very descriptively. This is my first time seeing the map, but that's exactly what I pictured it looking like. And it's really fun. You know, there are some really remarkable devices that you put in there that just made it so perfect for an audiobook that I think will be so interesting as well in film. But you know, there's ways where he figured out a way of incorporating backstory in a way that didn't feel like explanations,
Crammed in.
exposition. Like, thank you. Someone said that and helped me out there.
Yeah,
Didn't feel like exposition. Like there was just these really smart ways where just the things were revealed and how she communicated and the situations as they came up that just had a very audio sort of thing, but very visual. Like I could definitely see this in the film. And I wonder, actually, do you think that your writing style changed a bit because of The Martian and you wrote it more with that potentiality?
Wait.
Or do you think that's just how you naturally write? I'm sorry, this is my first time meeting him.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry, actually. It's very true. Or like, because obviously unfortunately I did not read The Martian, but I'm imagining it would be very similar. I want to read it now, but it would be. I imagine it was, because you're so descriptive that I don't think that could just have come up from nowhere, but.
I'll answer quickly because obviously Jada wants us to move on.
Yeah.
No, they just keep saying we need to play another clip. So.
Oh, okay. Figuring out where to sneak exposition in is the biggest challenge. If I make a story that takes place in Chicago, I could just say Chicago, and everybody knows what that means. But when you invent an entire city from scratch, you've got to tell the reader everything. And it's always a challenge to figure out, I have to figure out when to tell them about this and that. So yeah, that's a lot of work. With The Martian, I got away with it because I had the first-person narrator log entry, like describing his action to I could just get away with it. He could just say like, oh, now I'm going to spend 3 paragraphs telling you about this thing because I'm telling you about it. But Artemis, it was a little hard to sneak in.
We're going to roll another audio clip of a more technical moment that Andy, I would like you to tell us about once it's played. Yeah.
Earth's air is 20% oxygen. The rest is stuff human bodies don't need, like nitrogen and argon. So Artemis's air is pure oxygen at 20% Earth's air pressure. That gives us the right amount of oxygen while minimizing pressure on the hulls. It's not a new concept. It goes back to the Apollo days. Thing is, the lower the pressure, the lower the boiling point of water. Water boils at 61 degrees Celsius here, so that's as hot as tea or coffee can be. Apparently, it's disgustingly cold to people who aren't used to it.
So, Andy, you even thought about how coffee would taste on the moon.
Yeah, and tea.
What was sort of the most interesting part of the scientific stuff that you were working on? And then Rosario, like, what did you find most interesting? I mean, you're having to imagine how people walk around in a sixth of the Earth's gravity and what that means. I thought it was really interesting. There's a character who is crippled on Earth but can walk around on crutches on the moon, and so that's why her family moved.
Yeah, one character, she's fortunate enough to be from a very wealthy family, but yeah, on the moon she would be unable to, on Earth she would be in a wheelchair, but on the moon she can walk around with these little crutches that have the handle here and the little brace there, and she can easily move around.
And what did you find sort of interesting? What was the most fun space fact that you learned reading this?
Things like contraband being fired, because of the situation where people are, like, you can't just light a match, because you've got oxygen and just sort of like those types of things. Pressure, and just the stuff that you think you know about and how you would have to do it. It reminded me a lot of scuba diving. And when you're underwater, there's a totally different pressure, there's a totally different reality, and the things that you would normally do, you can't just, your instincts are completely wrong, and you have to adapt to that new environment and still do the things that you think you're normally doing, like breathing. But like the whole idea of it is so different. Like, so the idea of her just people going to the moon for a short period of time and being okay and being able to come back to the States and it, you know, America and not, or Earth, and it not being an issue.
There's more than just America here.
I know. But like for someone who's like herself, who's lived there since she was 6 years old, it would be pretty crippling for her after growing in that level, that kind of gravity. The types of instincts that she has, you know, in a scuffle or whatever that someone who's coming from Earth wouldn't necessarily have, because how you would move and jump and like how you would use your environment around you is so transformed, and your instincts are much more adapted than someone who's coming from someplace else and not recognizing what that means to pitch or jump or move that quickly. But that's like that's the way that I loved how so much of that very technical information was expressed, was through those situations, was through a character who would be in a wheelchair and on Earth and could walk there, and you know, just through coffee, you know, something that like you would really get that.
Or condom manufacturing.
Or condom manufacturing, yes, like so many different things that just really.
They're not joking, audience.
There's really
that's a thing in the book.
That are just like, it just makes it really interesting to explore this potential future.
Yeah. We're gonna get ready for the audience portion of the Q&A, right aisle only. There's only one of the mics that's working.
Second left aisle.
I was like, that's so discriminatory. Only on the right aisle, you're